Okay, hi everybody. All right, so this will be the last lecture of this semester. We're focusing on interviewing methods and just kind of some details about interviewing. I think I discussed earlier in the course, interviewing is one of those tasks or skills that's somewhat like difficult to practice in the sense of there's not particularly good formula or anything. And I think I mentioned, if you ever want to get better, watching a really good salesman or salesperson is a great option. Or we all know people that are just like super genuine and inherently likable in some ways. And that's helpful too. But I'll go over just some systematic concepts and different things to keep in mind to make sure that your accident investigation interviews are successful. All right, so just a quick recap, course total. I think everybody did great. And I hope it was valuable for everybody. I was really impressed with how everybody kind of developed pretty deep knowledge of their accidents. Hope that helps for trivia or if you ever need it again. But I think you all did a great job of capturing some of those nuances and things that are not always present in a report. And I don't think we haven't met since before Thanksgiving. So there was a few comments there about that article. It seems like it was an interesting read for everybody. It is 20 years, 25 or something years old. So a lot of changes since then. But I think a lot of it still holds true. Presentations are due, I guess, or post them in the Slack this Friday. And then all of next week, our final quote unquote will just be interacting on everybody's presentations, commenting, asking questions, having some back and forth on those threads. But in general, that's what I think you guys are going to be fine. If you do have any questions, let me know. I've had a few people reach out to me just wanting, a sanity check on a concept, like did they get it right or is the way they're doing it correct or something. Feel free to reach out whenever, or if you need anything else. So otherwise, yeah, we'll get in here. So initially, what is an interview? So formally, it's a form of oral communication involving two parties, at least one of whom, and this is where it gets important, has a preconceived and serious purpose and involving the asking and answering of questions. It's the preconceived and serious purpose. It's different than a casual conversation because there's something you're trying to get out of it. And in general, one of the things I put in here, the third bullet there, note taking plays a part. That's always been a kind of like dividing line for an interview versus a conversation. But not always. I mean, for us, an accident investigation, it's probably pretty consistent that you're going to have that. But in other instances, again, if we go back to a salesperson, imagine when someone's trying to get some information about you or your use case of a product or those things. They are totally interviewing you and they're generally not making notes. So that's an interesting part of that as well. But like I said, for us, an accident investigation, there's some big points that we will need to be accurate on, and note taking is valuable for that. So 4 elements of a good interview: preparation, opening, your question process, and your closing. These are all incredibly important, especially when we're talking about accident investigation. So recall, in an accident, as an investigator, your job is to talk to people, figure out what happened, what went wrong, those things. Typically, if there's an investigation being done, there was some kind of a loss or harm. Either somebody was hurt, property was damaged, whatever. And those are usually things that historically people tend to get fired over. So you're already kind of at a disadvantage with some of your interviews because of the perception of your process. So following a systematic process like this and will help kind of catch you up to a good starting point versus starting from behind again. But each one of these is important, and especially where we're talking about accidents in these complex systems. You definitely need to make sure that you've got all the information possible together so you're not guessing or falling down rabbit holes that are unnecessary. So preparation. So have a timeline sketched and develop a list of interviewees and a list of questions. Your list of interviewees will tend to be folks directly involved with the incident or in that second layer or second tier of folks who maybe are aware but weren't immediately involved. You could have different operations subject matter experts that can report about how things should have been done and those things, and developing a list of questions. So it's important to go in with at least a plan of how you're going to approach it. An old saying that speaks to lawyers, but it lends itself pretty well to this situation too, is a good lawyer never asks a question they don't know the answer to. That's kind of where you want to be. Now, if you ask a question, you know the answer, and you get a contradictory response, that in accident investigation, right, we're not trying to catch people or trip them up. Your information may be wrong. There might be nuances you haven't captured. And this comes into build an error-free scenario. We don't fix that. To compare deviations and information. So you need to have like a perfect instance. We talked about this with change analysis, right? So this is how the system or the process should have happened, what changed, what was different. You need to be mindful of your environment. This is incredibly important when you select the location of your interviews. It's one thing to have a conversation. Think back to when you were a kid. It's one thing if you're having a parent conversation on parent-teacher night, there's other parents around and you're in a classroom with your teacher. It's a totally different vibe if there isn't anybody else around and you're in the principal's office. In accident investigation, a lot of these people are going to be thinking they're going to the principal's office. So it's important to pick a neutral area, a random conference room or some of those things versus, an executive's office or something like that they might associate with a negative consequence. With the developing a list of questions, plan most of them. So this is where especially human factors folks will be familiar with the idea of a structured versus an unstructured interview. This is definitely a little bit more on the structured side. Frequently, we'll use semi-structured interviewing techniques in human factors where we have some fixed questions we need the answers to, but there's enough room and time for free-form discussions and things. You will have some time and room for follow-up, but you really are trying to make sure that you don't end up bloating your scope or, again, getting information that then confuses you or gets you off of focus of what was actually going on there. So you typically want to stick with your questions generally. Allow time between your interviews so that you can take notes, revise anything if you feel necessary, make sure that you've captured everything that needed to come from that interview. This is the only time you're going to remember what this person said, really. So make sure that your notes and everything are very thorough and explanatory and easy to follow. Which leads us to developing a shorthand. So this was especially relevant, long time ago before computers and we could easily record things and that. But But if you are taking notes by hand and even on a computer, you may want to develop some way to make sure that you can capture a concept without it really bogging you down. Next, going into opening. So opening an interview, this is the person you are interviewing has shown up. You open the door. This is when it starts. This is the most important part of your actual interview. It is far more important than anything they're going to say, because this opening will determine if they say anything. You set the tone. You're going to define your scope and intent. Remember, the first impressions are important. And these next three things are very critical, especially the last one. This should put the interviewee at ease, orient the interviewee to the purpose of the interview, and establish your credibility. Now, keep in mind, we talked about like just culture stuff. Within the just culture framework, when you're bringing these people in, they're not getting fired. Mistakes are for organizational learning. They're not punitive. So that is something to explain to some of these folks, is like, you're not there to fire them. You're not there to take their job or anything. You're just there to figure out what happened so that they can prevent it from happening again. And lastly, you want to make sure that they see you as an authority in this sense, where you can establish, I was brought in by the company to investigate this incident, and just to kind of explore what happened, and you're a neutral party, all those aspects. That's what's important. Remember, most of these people won't care at all about any acronyms after your name or degrees that you have. They just want to mainly know you're not going to fire them, and your intentions are sound, and that your intentions are to get to just the truth versus getting to the blame. Now, some information for the interviewee. During the opening, you want to make sure that you can explain all this. Again, for our students who have a human factors or a psych background, this will be very similar to like an informed consent. So you'll offer them an overview of the material to be covered. You will give them direct answers to any questions, no opinions. You also want that from them as well. If you don't know the answer, say so, and then provide the answer later. This is something for you specifically. So if they ask you a question about something and you have no idea, then just say so, because that helps. Again, remember, we're still trying to build credibility and trust. They also might ask these questions, and these are important things to know, what your stance on these is before you even go into the room. So what will you do with what I tell you? Will my name be used? How long will it take? And lastly, why me? So why were they selected to come in for an interview? These ones you can't not know the answer, essentially. So make sure that you are clear with this information and honest. If the company or whatever, if the situation, there's an expectation for confidentiality there, then you need to hold to that. And that'll be, your professional obligation in essence. So that's important to keep in mind. Then as we go into our, sorry about that. Oh, hold on. Okay, so we go into the questioning process. So different types of questions. So there's open or closed questions. So we've all kind of been through this. Open questions are broad. They're not yes or no answers. It gives them some freedom to think through an answer or to answer in their way. And it communicates an interest and trust. It communicates that you are interested and trust them. Again, we typically ask open questions to people of authority or people of an expertise. Again, if you've ever worked in a sales environment, especially in a more technical or specialized industry, you might have experienced something where people will come up and say, well, what do you expect? What do you prefer? What do you recommend? This is kind of that similar interaction. Closed, they limit answers, so just to yes or no. You typically will need to follow up on a closed question to get the whole picture. One thing to caution about, it could seem interrogatory. There we go. And so it's important to just consider that. So that's why when you develop your list of questions, and I should have put this on that slide, but you want to make sure that you noodle that over with colleagues or with other folks and ask them their questions and see if any of it comes off particularly pointed or interrogatory, because again, you're not interrogating people, you're just trying to get information. And then you have leading or neutral questions. So these are just some examples. Leading questions is when the question is assuming the answer. So don't you think we need more engineers is assuming information within it that there is not enough, or you are assuming that their belief is this not enough. People will are far more likely to confirm information than deny it. So leading questions will typically get you into trouble where they'll just answer the question. They won't necessarily stop and give you a broader piece of information. It's also important to know, and this is something that especially I think in some of the psych fields or other things where we think leading questions are like unethical and bad, and well, we don't do those things. Leading questions are extremely natural. We all ask leading questions every single day because we put so much of our experience and our beliefs into all of our interactions. So if you have leading questions, don't beat yourself up about it. Just change them to neutral. Again, we're not lawyers, so there's really no need for a leading question. You're not trying to get support for a particular idea or anything. So that's important to note. And another aspect of questioning strategies here is the funnel or the inverted funnel. So think about the vertical, top to bottom distance of these things as a function of time during the interview. So it's not naturally required, but it can be a natural way to plan the interview. And it's kind of one of those things that over time, you'll figure out what works for you, what works for the situation and the circumstance that you're in, and all of that with which of these to use, where you start with open-ended questions and then you funnel down to closed-ended questions, usually when you're trying to validate or narrow the answers you've got in the open section. And vice versa with closed, you start asking closed questions and then note the answers that you want to follow up on. Your follow-up questions then are open-ended questions. So listening fundamentals. So these are pretty big deals to make sure that you avoid are the problems, I would say. So, visual, audible distractions, make sure you're in a neat area, those things. I recall a video once where a police officer who was actually in law school was talking about, talking to the police without a lawyer present and those things. And he discussed an interrogation room and how the rooms are specifically designed so that you don't want to be in there. That is the entire point, is so that you want to leave. They are designed to make you uncomfortable. And even if you've never had the occasion to be in an interrogation room, we all know rooms or different instances, situations that are very uncomfortable and places that are. So you want to avoid that. Over talking, this is a huge problem I personally have, where I will jump in, I'll almost finish their thought for them and go ahead. That's something to practice. If you also struggle with that, practice managing that. Jumping to conclusions, prejudice and bias is one of the biggest ones that you need to be aware of, especially in yourself. We all have prejudices and biases, and being able to recognize those in yourself, especially during these interviews, will be valuable to make sure you don't taint your own data. And yeah, solutions, these are all just things to consider. Maintaining eye contact is important. Asking a question and then waiting for the answer, and waiting for them to finish the answer, in my sense. So it's important to just kind of consider those things as you're developing your questions and answers and those things. Then interview closeout. So this is, and you can kind of take each of these with a grain of salt, or depending on what your application space is, there might be different ones, but these are just pretty common ones within like the nuclear realm that we tend to use. At the very, very end, is there anything they could have done or would do differently if faced with the task again to avoid the negative results? This might help them put themselves in that perfect scenario you developed before, and they might catch something that's different in themselves that maybe didn't come out in the interview. You summarize what you've learned from the interviewee and give them a general idea of what comes next. Thanking them is important, and making sure that you, even really if you have no intent to follow up with them, you want to make sure that you leave that door open. It helps build that rapport, but also we don't know what information of the next interview might give us that might make us need to come back, or those things. So you always want to make sure that you keep those options open, and make sure that your rapport was good enough that they're open to that. That's also important. And give them, that kind of feeds in this next one, give them your contact information so they can contact you if they have any questions or if they recall anything particularly important. This is the standard, police procedural drama, hand somebody your business card moment. But it is definitely important because people will, for a lot of these folks, their interview with you will be a very impactful hour or whatever long it is of their day, and it will probably be something they think about lying in bed at night. They might come to some conclusions or recall things. Otherwise, especially in some of the really severe accidents that we've looked at here, a lot of times the full-blown accident investigators don't actually get in to interview people till the accident's been largely mitigated, especially if it's a catastrophic type event. So it's valuable to make sure that they can get in touch with you if they need. Overall, processes of the interview, just kind of some more information and more guidelines, right, that we've already kind of went over. But to take accurate notes, you may want to have a note taker present. I strongly recommend that you should always have a second person present, whether they are engaging in the interview or whether they are specifically taking notes for the interview. Just it helps to compare answers. I mean, we know that, again, the psych folks in the class will know, from inter-rater reliability issues, that it's important to have multiple angles. Again, my problem here, listen to the answers, don't interrupt. Use the timeline or matrix of information to guide your questioning. If appropriate, when necessary, go to the location where the problem occurred. This will be called like a walk down or walk through task analysis is another one we talked about earlier in the class that you might do. That can be valuable if there's, it's a very complex situation or environment and you really kind of have to see it. If you're having a hard time getting through that might be helpful. Odds are you will have already had some walk down experience as a part of your onboarding for this activity. So you will probably know, but it's important to know that you should do that if you feel like it's necessary. And asking if this is the first time this problem has happened. So this is something that a shocking amount of people don't do. And it's super helpful to capture some of the weird causal factors or latent issues that are exist on the periphery of your accident. So, we've all identified various economic reasons for accidents or um, organizational failures, safety culture things. That's where this stuff will come in. Um, you know, if they say, oh no, we've had this a lot, this is just, we've dropped that thing all the time. This is just the first time that it blew up when we did. Uh, those kind of things, okay, well, why does this keep happening? And that'll get you at some of those causal factors that you might not otherwise capture. And lastly, just thanks. Thanks for letting me teach the class. I appreciate it. Hope it was good for you and you learned something interesting. I think I kind of explained that at the beginning, right? My entire goal, like one of my favorite professors in undergrad used to say, for better or worse, I'm required to give you a letter grade at the end of this class. I probably wouldn't if I didn't have to. I just don't think that's that necessary. But so my goal is to make sure it's interesting and you learn something that's useful to you. And there was some fun or weird, funny things. And the last bullet point. So usually around this time of the semester, I'm getting emailed constantly from whatever bot the university uses to tell your students to fill out course evaluations, blah, blah, blah. I haven't gotten any of those. So I'm assuming they're open because it's the end of the semester. But, if you haven't, complete those. Or if for some reason I don't have a course eval, which also could be quite possible, and there's something I'm supposed to do, let me know if you can't find it or something, and I can figure out whatever I'm doing wrong or haven't done. So either way, yeah, hope it was good. And if there's ever anything I can do to help or in the future or anything, shoot me an email. Appreciate it and thank you.